I'm ready.
Okay. All right. First, I'm going to ask you about family background and some childhood questions. Was your family a prominent member in Ashland? Just what was the importance of your family name, your grandparents, your parents? Just general childhood questions.
All right. Childhood, or can I go back to my grandfather?
Okay. Go ahead.
My grandfather, D.B. Cox, came to Ashland just after the war. Now, you know, the war is the war between the states. It was the late 1860s that he came to Ashland, and he built a house right on the railroad track, right at the site, the present site of the Ashland Library. And he opened a little store, which was right on the corner of the railroad and Robinson Street. And in his home, he and his wife, Mrs. Cox, my grandmother, Sally, raised 6 girls and 1 boy, and the 1 boy was my father. And D.B. Cox had other stores with several partners in Ashland across the tracks. But in the Great Fire of 1893 that destroyed a lot of the Ashland business district, the stores were destroyed, so they bought lots at the corner of Thompson Street, and in a few years built a 2-story brick building, which is where the Iron Horse restaurant is now. And that was the D.B. Cox store that most people remember. My father, growing up in the house with 6 sisters, had a lot of stories to tell about how difficult that was. But he went to work at his father's store at D.B. Cox and Company when he was quite a young man, and always worked there, and wanted very much, of course, to leave Ashland and travel and do other things, but life kept him at Ashland. In 1924, he and my mother were married. She was from Richmond. Her maiden name was Vaughn. And they lived in Ashland and built a little brick house on Howard Street. And that's where I was born. Because, you know, now everyone rushes to Richmond to have their babies in hospitals. But once upon a time, home births were quite normal. The doctor would come with a midwife or a nurse and deliver the baby at home. And my brother and I were both born in the house on Howard Street. So I grew up in Ashland, and at that time, of course, many people were commuting to Richmond on the train. Other people were driving. There was a lot of business activity right in the center of town, and you walked everywhere, or you rode your tricycle or your bicycle everywhere. I was fortunate that I was around the corner from school. The Ashland School was located on James Street at the corner of Hanover Avenue. Now the Henry Clay Elementary School is there. But at one time, there was a large 2-story brick building that had both elementary and high school in it. And that's where I started in the 1st grade. And that building was demolished, and the new Henry Clay School was built. And so by the time I graduated from high school, we were all in the Henry Clay, what is now the Henry Clay School. I think you have a question for me?
How about, what did you do for fun in Ashland when you were growing up? What kind of entertainment was there, like movie theaters? Any notable people that you remember from your childhood, like any characters?
Well, Ashland has always been full of characters. There were many characters, but not the famous people. No, I did not remember. I do not recall any famous people. But Ashland, being the small town, as all small towns do, you have your characters, and we used to play in neighborhood yards. Boys would have their teams playing in the street or playing in a vacant lot. We went to the movie. We could go for a nickel in the afternoon. And there was a wonderful store right here on Railroad Avenue that is now where the cobblestone bicycle store is, Mr. Mayberg's store. And Mr. Mayberg had penny candy. So you could go in and buy, a couple of cents worth of candy and then cross the track to the 5 cents to the movies. So this was, Ashland was wonderful. It really was. We went to school with this same group all the way through elementary and high school. I mean, today I have friends in Ashland who were my classmates in those days. And that, of course, made for a very a compact group of friends that were with you. And we also had our Girl Scouts were very important. The Boy Scouts were important. And there were, of course, churches, many churches in Ashland, there were Sunday school activities. So you were always busy, always plenty of things to do.
Okay. You had said that you had left Ashland, and I was just wondering, like, maybe some reasons why you left Ashland and then why you came back.
Well, I left Ashland because it was such a hick town. That's all we could talk about. How soon can we get out of this place? Now, let me backtrack just a minute and tell you a little bit more about growing up in Ashland. Once we were out of grammar school and into high school, we began to be looking around at Randolph-Macon boys. And those, I suppose, in those days, the freshmen were easy to spot because they were required to wear their little beanie skull caps. You know about that? Mm-hmm. And also at that time, the boys didn't have automobiles as students do now. So they were more in town. They were shopping. They were going to the theater, movies. They were dating Ashland girls and were very visible. And there was a far more community with the college than there is now, but simply because things have changed and everybody has a car and you go away somewhere on weekends. And why go to Ashland? Well, anyway, but growing up in Ashland, fun as it was a small town, and I wanted to get away. So after I had graduated from college, I went to Mary Washington, and then I took my senior year at VCU. At that time, it was called Richmond Professional Institute of the College of William and Mary, because I was a drama major, and that was a very good drama school there. So I went there, and then I worked a little bit just to get some money together to get on the train and go to New York. And that was a wonderful experience. In New York in those days, it was safe to get around. You could ride the subway, you could go anywhere, it was not a fearful place at all. And it was a great and wonderful experience to have. And I worked in interesting jobs there. I got some jobs in advertising and public relations and different things that were quite interesting. And I met my husband. And he was he was at the French consulate in New Orleans. And at the time, I was working for a public relations agency, and we were doing publicity for French food. That was a good assignment. And that's how I met my husband, and we were married, and then I moved to New Orleans. And I stayed many years in New Orleans. And that was just a marvelous experience living in the French Quarter. And I came back to Ashland years later after he died, and I decided it was just time to come back home. So I came back to Ashland in 2000 and just had a wonderful time here, going to working at the library, being in the variety show, doing all sorts of marvelous things that you do in Ashland.
All right. How about, does your family have any stories from the Civil War, any family stories, or did your grandparents fight in the Civil War, or some just general questions about what you remember or what your grandparents told you about? Well,
my relatives, yes, of course, were in the Civil War, but I don't have any particular stories to tell about it, because Ashland was, they were not in Ashland at the time.
Okay. About your brother?
My brother.
You want to talk about your brother?
Talk about my brother? Sure, I'll talk about my brother.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, my brother, Ed Cox, also grew up here, and Ed went to Randolph-Macon, and he too left Ashland and came back. Because after he graduated, he was in Tennessee and other areas of Virginia in education. He was taught, it was in school administration, and then he came back to Ashland to be a registrar and director of admissions at Randolph-Macon. And he came with his wife and 2 young children at that time, and they moved in to the house where we had lived when we were children. So his children walked around the corner to Henry Clay School, just as we had.
I know we kind of covered this a little bit, but just some general questions about your careers and your education. What schools did you attend? What did you like or dislike about school? Some differences between education then and now, and just kind of like what types of jobs have you had, and just what kind of careers and stuff like that.
Well, about education, I don't know a great deal about what education is today. But I think growing up in Little Ashland, we had remarkable teachers. We had excellent teachers for history, for geography, for math. We had one teacher, Miss Eleanor Sidner, and I'll have to mention her by name because she's famous. We all loved her. She said, "I teach the 3 M's: mathematics, morals, and manners." This was high school now. And here we were in high school, and she had us sailing all through algebra and geometry and trigonometry. And severe Mrs. Heaton, who sat there, looked like a Victorian lady with her hair up about her head, giving us 4 years of Latin in Ashland. Now, that's not the way it is today, is it? We had 2 years of French and 4 years of Latin right here in Ashland before we ever went off to college. And we had strict discipline. We had growing up in our elementary school and high school, because there was one principal for both. And I'll mention Mr. Compton, George Compton. He was a tall man with a deep voice and very imposing, and who didn't take any mischief from anybody. And to be told that you were going to be sent to Mr. Compton's office sent fear and shaking limbs through everyone. But that's the way it was. You and Mr. Compton would say, "What's going on over there? You boys, quiet, sit still." That was all that had to be said. It was very, I think probably discipline problems are far greater and more complicated today than they were when you had strict teachers and principals.
Okay, let's talk about World War I. Do you have any family stories from World War I? How did World War I impact your family?
Well, World War I, of course, at that time, my father was here in Ashland, and I remember reading recently about the severe rationing. And the D.B. Cox Company, the store, was one of the few that got some sugar. And Randolph-Macon College got some sugar. And a few other merchants, but there was very strict rationing then. I have no particular stories of, I had family members. My mother's uncle was a decorated World War I officer. But Ashland, I have no real stories of Ashland in World War I.
How about, does your family have any stories from the Great Depression, and how did the Great Depression affect your family?
Well, the Depression, of course, I remember. I was here in the Great Depression. And although I was a child and not as aware and knowledgeable about the tough times, I knew that we had to choose this or that. We couldn't have both. And, clothes were worn a long time. Let out the hem of the dress and wear it another year, kind of thing. The money was tight, definitely. But children, go out and play and have fun and are not nearly as affected like that. So I think Ashland was certainly depressed in the Great Depression, no question about it. And I can remember the hobos. That was a greatly a product of the Depression, who were riding the trains looking for jobs, and they would show up at the back porch and say, could you have anything to eat, and I'll do some work for you, sort of thing. So the hobos were very much a part of Ashland. That's a whole story in itself, which would be interesting to get someone to tell you about the hobos and how they would mark on the gate. They have special little secret marks and say, this is a good place to go, they'll feed you, sort of thing. And but so that of course was, once the Depression was over, that sort of disappeared. And I think did you want to ask me anything else about that time?
Just, do you remember the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA?
I remember some young men who went in the CCP, isn't it? CCC. Yeah, CCP, because they couldn't find work, but they were healthy, eager, ready to work, and so it was a wonderful program, because they worked and they were required to send their salary home. So that I remember hearing about so and so was doing that, and it was a great help to his family to get the money and everything. So I feel that was probably an excellent program for the time. The WPA, no, I have no particular comments about WPA.
I know you kind of mentioned this before, but just a few questions about how the college has affected. In what ways did having the college in the town affect your life? We kind of already went over this, like any family members that went to Randolph-Macon. Do you remember any certain events that happened at the college, and just how it affected your neighborhood and community?
Well, growing up in Ashland, when Randolph-Macon was a men's college, was absolutely wonderful. We enjoyed fraternity parties, we enjoyed ball games, we enjoyed the dances, the parties, and I was thrilled that the Randolph-Macon players discovered me, because of course they used town girls in their plays for the female roles. So any of us who would be cast, and that was great fun. And I had several years that I was doing that. So yes, definitely Randolph-Macon is a big part of my life growing up in Ashland. Absolutely, because we, as some of the girls married their Randolph-Macon beaux. And also when the World War II started, the college population dropped tremendously. And there was even some little, rumor that, will the college close, sort of thing. But the Army sent a Army Special Training Program here. And the college boys left, but the Army marched in. And that, again, gave great boost and cries of joy among the town girls when they saw. And they had these wonderful young men who were here for a sort of a officer training, and some Ashland girls married ASTP boys. So that was great, and we were always very, very excited about the Randolph-Macon the home games, and the great rivalry with Hampton-Sydney that still goes on, and all that was very exciting, very wonderful.
Now, just a few questions about your neighborhood when you were a child. Just a general description of your neighborhood. How has the town changed since when you were a child? Just some general places, like the original Henry Clay Inn, the racetrack on Ash Cake Road, Cross Brothers, just some general things about that. And what do you think about some of the newer businesses like Ashland Coffee and Tea and Suzanne's and the Iron Horse Restaurant?
Well, the new businesses are wonderful. I particularly like the new businesses in this up and down the tracks, because, of course, that's been one great change in Ashland, that business has moved to shopping centers on the fringes of the edge of town. And so we have lost that kind of center activity that we had. So I think it's wonderful that entrepreneurs are coming back to this area, this particular part of town, and doing things. Growing up in my neighborhood was very easy. It was a 2-block-long residential street. And most of the houses were built in the early years of this century. My father and mother moved in 1927, and that was one of the newer houses built then. And and so it was easy just to play in the yard, to go from one yard to the other, to ride your bicycle, ride tricycles. And we had always had pets. We had dogs, and the dogs could run around. And now they can't, of course, they're on the leash. But I look out now, and I see on that same street, I see children on tricycles and bicycles, and dogs on leashes, and baby carriages, and boys skateboarding, because we had roller skates and we played. So in some ways, that hasn't had much change, which is very nice. And so the other part, of course, it changes. Ashland's growing, it changes. And that's to be expected, and that's fine.
I know you had mentioned a little bit about this before, but do you have any family stories from World War II and you and your family's reaction to Pearl Harbor and just general stories about World War II?
Well, of course, the Pearl Harbor absolutely galvanized everybody in this country. Now, by World War II, I had grown up to the point that, that was really meaningful. We did all sorts of things. For instance, we would spot for airplanes. The Girl Scouts, I was a senior scout, and that was one of our duties. We had to take a class in identification. We could identify all the fighters and bombers of every nation fighting. So if it flew over Railroad Avenue, we would know it. But actually, we had 2-hour shifts to spot planes. I used to go down to a field in Gwathmey, and there we would sit with the telephone and binoculars, and of course, fortunately, no enemy planes came over, but we had to report in any plane that we saw and identify it as best we could. Sometimes it was really easy. It would be flying right over you, know exactly what it is, and you could call into wherever it was, Richmond, I suppose, and say so-and-so just flew over, going north. And but this was part of what we did. We also were rationed, with shoes, and were rationed as long with gas, and we had books, our little ration books, coupons. You're going to buy a certain amount of sugar and other commodities. And we began saving things. We had to save tinfoil. And I remember saving bacon grease. And there was some reason that they could do something with bacon grease to make ammunition. But anyway, this was bottled up and packed up and sent somewhere. And we all were very, very conscious of the war effort. And everybody was in. We were of one mind to fight and win. And so we were very conscious of all of our classmates who were leaving to go in the service, and would they be going overseas and all that. It was constantly with us. And soon we began to notice the troop trains going through. And these boys most of them were on their way to ports, either to Norfolk to ship out, or up, if they were headed north, they were going up to Baltimore or to New York to ship overseas. And we would wave, and they would wave, and sometimes they would throw their name and address out to us, and so we had pen pals. We'd immediately write to them, and this would go on for a certain length of time, and so on. And the troop trains, boy, I remember that very well.
Speaking of the train, what do you remember about the train? Just, was it a big impact in the community? Did you take the train anywhere interesting, or did you take the train regularly? Just travel and stuff on the train.
Well, I took the train to New York when I left town, and that was great. Yes, I used to would take the train a lot when I was in college in Fredericksburg, and then later when I lived in New York. Yes, I was traveling by train all the time then. And the trains was very much a part of everybody's life in Ashland growing up. And I remember, we had the steam engines way back when, and then they gave way to others. And when I remember being out on the sidewalk with all the neighborhood to watch for the first streamlined train. And we were all lined up there on Railroad Avenue, and I was with a friend, and she and I very often would go and put our ear to the track to listen for the train coming, because you could hear it in the track. So we decided, where's the streamline? Everybody's waiting, why doesn't it come? Well, maybe it is coming. Let's go and put our... So we ran away. We left the crowd, ran from the crowd to the middle of the train track and put our ear to the track to listen. And her mother came after us screaming and jerked us up, and she said, "Don't you know it's going to come through so fast you won't even be able to hear it coming?" Right. Well, after the silver meteor, the streamlined train whizzed through, well, it didn't really whiz through, it came very slowly so that we could all wave and so on. But we did notice that with these new trains, the windows were tinted so you couldn't see the people inside. And we kind of missed that because we liked seeing the people. We'd wave and they'd wave back, and we'd go see them. And we would be mostly waving at the trains as we were walking up to go to Barnes Drugstore or Hughes's Drugstore, where we could always go and have ice cream and have fun. And then, of course, in our later days, when we were very sophisticated, we would go to the college hangout. It's called Bobby Stone. Bobby Stone was down where there's a bank building there now. It's at the corner of US 1 and Route 54. And Bobby Stone, of course, he sold beer, but of course we didn't drink any beer. We weren't old enough. But those who were old enough could get a beer, and the jukebox that played, and we danced. And that was such fun. And the college boys would come there, and we'd go there, and we would dance. And one of my friends reminded me recently that when she had learned to drive, and her father said, you cannot cross number 1 highway. You can only drive in town, but don't cross number 1 highway. And she said, I'd come and pick you up, and we'd drive down to the corner, and I'd park right on this side of the highway, and we'd walk across number 1 to go to Bobby Stone's. Yes, growing up in Ashland was quite simple, quite fun. That's a lot of fun.
Do you know anything about the unsolved murder case that happened in Ashland?
No. I don't know anything about it at all. I was really young when all that happened, and I can remember, though, when on summer evenings, people in Ashland would sit out on porches and yards and chat. You didn't just hang around TV games and television all the time. You were out talking with the neighbors, talking with the family. And whenever the subject of the unsolved Smeeman murder would come up, my father would always say, "Please lower your voices. I don't want anyone to hear who's talking to me." And it was just something that people didn't talk about a lot. Everyone seemed to think that somebody else knew something. It has remained unsolved and probably will be.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's all we have. Thank you so much.